Good afternoon and welcome to this EFI Foundation event, High Quality Jobs in the Clean Energy Transition. My name is Alicia Moulton and I'm the Deputy Director of Communications. The EFI Foundation continues the work of the Energy Futures Initiative to advance technically grounded solutions for the clean energy transition through evidence-based analysis, thought leadership, and coalition building. Yesterday, we at the EFI Foundation released a new report, Job Quality, the Keystone of Clean Energy Industrial Policy. It is available on our website, efifoundation.org, and we are pleased to open up a dialogue on the report with this event today. Before we begin, two quick announcements. First, this event is being recorded and will be available afterward on the Energy Futures Initiative YouTube channel. Second, at the end of the hour, after we conclude the panel discussion, we will have an audience Q&A. If you have questions about the report or anything you hear from our speakers and panelists, you can submit your questions through Zoom's chat feature at any time during the event. We will read off questions during the Q&A portion and we'll get to as many as possible. And now to kick things off, I give the floor to EFI Foundation CEO and the 13th Secretary of Energy, Ernest Moniz.
Hello, and welcome to all of you for tuning in to this discussion, motivated, as Alicia said, by our report posted yesterday on job quality. In my view, this report and discussion are energized by two principal realities. First, we will only exacerbate clean energy transition headwinds if we don't acknowledge that lots of real people in different regions and different economic sectors have real uncertainties about their place in the clean energy transition, and we need to shape that transition by supporting these workers and communities. And second, the legislative trifecta of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, or IIJA, the CHIPS and Science Act, and the IRA, all enacted by Congress in less than a year, are major steps for American leadership in clean energy, but also represent a breathtaking step towards industrial policy beyond the traditional military-industrial policy, and yet still with a significant amount of bipartisan support. The legislation was also crafted to merge these two realities by incorporating major incentives to support workers and communities, to advance high-quality union jobs in particular, project labor agreements, prevailing wage requirements, local and targeted hire authorities, workforce development and apprenticeships, place-based energy community bonus tax credits, domestic content requirements, and the inclusion of a community benefits plan in competitive grant applications. So make no mistake about it, this is a significant step towards a reconstituted social compact, even as it supports a re-energized clean energy transition. As is so often the case, it comes down to implementation. And this report on job quality is filled with information and recommendations about how to maximize that implementation. Of course, a report that starts with 5 pages of acronyms will challenge your ability to process all that information, but I do highly recommend it. Now, I am very pleased to be joined by Senator Tina Smith of Minnesota, a longtime champion of climate solutions and a very important contributor to the recent passage of the IRA. Senator Smith brings a unique perspective to this discussion, having worked at every level of government, local, state, and federal, in crafting climate solutions. At the local level, she was Chief of Staff to Minnesota Mayor Ryback when he led the formation of the Mayor's Green Manufacturing Initiative. Subsequently, she was Chief of Staff to Minnesota Governor Mark Dayton. She was subsequently elected Lieutenant Governor of Minnesota and was responsible for implementing the state's efforts on climate policy. And finally, she has been Minnesota's junior senator since January 2018 and a critical advocate for and sponsor of multiple pieces of clean energy legislation. So thank you, Senator Smith, and welcome again here today. Now, as you look back at your work on climate policy across your different roles and different levels of government, why do you think this issue of quality jobs is so important to a successful climate movement that enacts historic legislation like the IIJA and the IRA?
Well, thank you so much, Secretary Moniz. And it's wonderful to be able to have this conversation with you, and especially to have it in the context of this really excellent EFI report that lays out really powerful recommendations for how we can keep people and opportunity for people at the center of our work around climate change. And, I think about this, I appreciate you talking about the different, roles in the public sector that I've played. And what I have seen is that whenever you are building policy, economic policy that truly puts opportunity for people at the center, you're going to end up with better policy. And I think that that's what we accomplished with this amazing suite of federal laws that we passed, that President Biden signed into law. And I think about it within this context that for years, our country had an economic policy that was about outsourcing jobs and taking power away from workers, with the idea that the tax cuts for big corporations, with the idea that that was going to boost economic growth, and the benefits of that economic growth was going to trickle down to workers, and they would be able to then feel some benefit. But that was a failed experiment. And what we've seen over the course of the last decades or so is increasing income inequality, increasing wage stagnation, and this great outsourcing of American jobs. What we do with this legislation is to address the clean energy transition, which is absolutely essential. It is an existential threat to our country, to our national security, to our opportunity. But we do it within the context of putting people at the center of that work, so that all of us can really experience the benefits of this transition. So it's not about a frame of sacrifice and lack of opportunity. It is a frame about seizing leadership in order to accomplish that opportunity. And I think that that's really motivating and gives us a lot to talk about today.
Terrific. And in fact, following on that, your state, Minnesota, is one that's certainly characterized by a very vibrant urban center, but also large agricultural rural parts of the state. How do you see bridging those views and those cultures to move ahead on the clean energy policy on the one hand, and the social compact issues as well?
Yeah. Well, I've been working on clean energy and the clean energy transition for a long time. And what I have learned from that, going all over the state, is that there is increasing understanding of the opportunity that we can all experience if we seize leadership on these issues. And so, my number one example is being in rural Minnesota. I can tell you that you do not have to convince Minnesota farmers and ranchers and food producers that climate change is real, because they can see it every single day in the increasing incidence of drought or floods or extreme weather events, changing climate. That means what grew really well in one part of the state, now that's shifting to another part of the state, as places like Minnesota that are pretty far north are experiencing greater variations in temperature than places that are a little bit farther south. So my constituents that live in small towns and rural places are very excited about the climate smart agriculture provisions that we passed in the Inflation Reduction Act. It allows them to take more advantage of some of the conservation practices that they already believe will really be the case. Similarly, in parts of my state, in more of the metro areas or big regional centers, the opportunity for clean energy manufacturing is already happening. I'm thinking, for example, of Cummins Engineering, which is making electrolyzers, hiring more people. Those opportunities wouldn't be there without the work that we did with the Inflation Reduction Act. And people can see the relationship between the threats that we have and then the opportunities that we can experience by seizing that. And then, the last thing I'll say, as you well know, is so much of what we do in the Inflation Reduction Act is about providing consumers with tools to make the transition to clean power, to more energy efficient appliances, to heat pumps. Even in Minnesota, heat pumps can work, and give them a way of lowering their energy costs, which is of great interest to them. So I see in Minnesota a lot of interest in what is happening, a lot of need for education and awareness raising as well, but a real understanding that this can be a place where we're leading. And last thing I'll say is the Minnesota legislature and Governor Walz have taken really exciting steps at the state level to keep on pushing towards net zero emissions in Minnesota. And that really complements all of the work we've done at the federal level.
Mhm. Is that a net zero 2050 commitment in the state?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Okay. And, again, focusing on the electricity sector, which is what I did, which was where my focus has been at the federal level. And again, it dovetails so well as the state is implementing the work that we did at the federal level. They are also establishing their own really strong policies.
Senator, I might just add as a little anecdote that 15 to 20 years ago, I was on the Cummins CEO Technology Advisory Committee. So I would just reinforce really the excellence of that company. And I know well the distributed energy focus in Minnesota.
Yeah.
Going back, however, to the extreme weather statements that you made, clearly we've just had the hottest June ever. We've had the hottest month ever in July. In Minnesota, you've almost certainly been suffering from the results of the forest fires in Canada, for example. And I'm just wondering, your statement, if you could elaborate on your statement about how both maybe urban and rural communities are seeing this extreme weather kind of come home, and how that influences their views, but also your policies. I think that would be of real interest.
Well, as you say, as I look out my window in St. Paul this afternoon, I can see the haze that has been with us nearly every single so-called sunny day that we've had in Minnesota all summer long. And so, and this is happening everywhere across the state. So it is to me, it puts in the forefront of our minds the reality that this climate change emergency is not something that is in the future. It is something that is happening right today, right now. But of course, a couple of summers ago, we were experiencing it because of fires in and around Minnesota's precious boundary waters. So the reminders have just been building and building and building. And to me, what is important in Minnesota and everywhere in the country is that we don't have these examples of the catastrophe of the climate emergency. We don't meet those examples with examples of what we can do about it, the steps that we can take. We have to meet that sort of sense of potential hopelessness that people might feel with a real sense of the actions that we can take, and actions that will actually enhance our competitiveness, improve job quality, and create more opportunity for people. And that is the real story. It's not just a Pollyanna story. It is the real story. And I do believe that it gives people in Minnesota and around the country some hope that we can seize the moment.
Yeah, I can't say it gives me great pleasure to note that it was already several years ago that I did say that I thought it was extreme weather that brought the costs home today. That would in fact start shifting the public views. I think we're seeing that today.
Yeah.
But also, I really appreciate that when you say the word jobs, you attach the word quality to that noun. And clearly, you've had now a substantial career. We've discussed in different levels of government, and I think it's correct to say always with strong labor support. Perhaps you could just elaborate on how you see the role of jobs, labor, and in particular unions going forward. Clearly, the Biden administration has obviously changed the dynamic quite substantially, and curious to see your view from Minnesota and your view from the Senate.
Well, I appreciate that question very much, because I'm very proud of the strong labor support that I have, and engaging with labor on economic issues, climate issues, as well as labor issues has always been kind of core to how I've seen that we need to solve this problem. And for a long time, there was sort of this, I would say sort of fake divide between labor issues and so-called environmental issues, and never the twain shall meet. And of course, our mutual friend, David Foster, has done a lot to bridge that gap with the Blue-Green Alliance and the work that that is done to really find that space of common and shared interest. But for me, and especially as we look at the huge opportunities that are unleashed by the Inflation Reduction Act and the Infrastructure and Jobs Act, the CHIP Act, is that we actually then put that value into action. My core value is that when people have the power and the right to come together collectively to organize for better working conditions and better wages and benefits and a safe and secure retirement, we all do better. That benefits absolutely everybody. And we need to counteract what has been a decades-long effort to reduce the power of people to be able to come together to do that kind of organizing. And we need to see that, and then we need to take action to change it. In the laws that we've passed, we have put, I think, real meat behind the domestic content rules and the prevailing wage rules and the project labor agreement requirements, which will rebalance that power between big companies and the workers that are employed by those big companies to be able to have a more even playing field. There's more that we have to do. I think we all know that. I just believe so strongly that if we could pass the Richard Trumka PRO Act to modernize and improve and strengthen our labor laws, we would be in a much stronger position. It's too easy for corporations like Starbucks, for example, to just flat out ignore some of the requirements and laws that we have around organizing, and we need to fix that. And then there's lots of other things that we need to do as well. We need to have a $17 an hour minimum wage. We need to have paid family and medical leave. We need to invest in childcare. These are all of the things that will help make it possible for more people to participate in better apprenticeship programs, supporting union apprenticeship programs. All of these things will help to make the promise of quality jobs real for more people. And that creates real opportunity.
Yeah, well, we certainly are aligned with your powerful inclinations there. In fact, you mentioned Rich Trumka, and several years back with Rich, and now, of course, with Liz Schuler and the AFL-CIO, we've had a very active labor-energy partnership at EFI, and we think it's one of our main threads and main contributions to keep the focus on jobs. When we were at DOE, we did start this energy employment report, and that's still going on. Which we're very pleased to see. So, so thank you for that. Maybe a last question I'm going to try to squeeze in, because you mentioned your particular focus on electricity, and of course we all know that electricity is the lead horse, if you like, in terms of decarbonization. In Minnesota, I'd be curious to understand. Is the state also committed, particularly to the electricity sector, to electrifying other parts of the economy, and in general, how to address industrial decarbonization, which can be a challenge?
Yeah, well, thank you for that. I'm really proud of what we're doing in Minnesota. And I actually need to correct myself. The new Minnesota standard is 100% by 2040, not by 2050. So Minnesota is taking an ambitious and very doable stance when it comes to the opportunities. But the point that you're raising around decarbonizing other sectors beyond the power sector is really important. We have transportation and we have heavy industry, and it all sort of falls together. I want to just mention as an example, Minnesota's Iron Range in the northern part of the state, which is the part of the state where the iron ore and taconite was mined to build this country and build the steel of this country for so many decades, is now increasingly on the new edge of transformation, whether it is the Helene facility, which is producing a large producer of solar panels, to the large electric co-op in that part of the state, which has made serious commitments towards clean power, which will power those giant and very energy intensive taconite pellet production facilities in northern Minnesota to opportunities around new industries like batteries, for example, in northern Minnesota. So yes, we're very much pushing all of that. We need the support from the federal government to be able to really get at these heavily carbon intensive heavy industries like you're talking about, Ernie, for example, cement manufacturing and other processes that are both energy intensive and also produce so much carbon, which is why I think we have to look at opportunities around carbon capture and storage. And I just returned from a trip to Iceland, where we were looking at some new technologies around direct air carbon capture and deep rock storage and mineralization of carbon. And we want to be pushing the technology here as much as we can on those new opportunities.
Yeah, well, we at EFI, large-scale carbon management is also one of our focal areas, and we just want to say how much we appreciate the support that you bring in those areas. Well, thank you, Senator Smith. I would like to go on, but I'm going to be getting the hook. But I think you've really set off this discussion in a terrific way, and bringing together those themes of again workers and social compact with the clean energy transition. So thank you, and we'll be right behind you pushing when you're back in the Senate. So thanks very, very much.
Thank you so much.
And now we're going to transition to the authors of the report, Hannah Sachs and Dave Foster. They're not going to, again, as I say, go through the whole report, but emphasize some of the major points. I'd just say that Hannah Sachs is a fellow with EFI. In the fall of 2023, she'll join Climate Jobs National Resource Center as a staff attorney. She just got her Juris Doctor, summa cum laude, and Master of Science in Public Policy at the University of Pennsylvania, where she was a Toll Public Interest Fellow. David Foster, who was mentioned by Senator Smith, was Senior Advisor to the U.S. Secretary of Energy from 2014 to 2017. I guess that was me, on energy, environmental, climate, economic development, workforce development, and labor relations. He designed and implemented the creation of DOE's Job Strategy Council, which linked our resources to a wide group of external stakeholders. And he also led the interagency effort to create the Energy and Advanced Manufacturing Workforce Initiative. As mentioned by the Senator, he was also the founding executive director of the Blue-Green Alliance. And with that, I'm going to turn it over, I think, first to Hannah, who will then turn it over to David.
Thank you very much, Secretary Moniz and Senator Smith, for that really insightful discussion on the importance of jobs and union representation to the clean energy transition. I'm going to share my screen to give a brief presentation on the report. Really delighted to be with you all today, launching EFI's latest report, Job Quality, the Keystone of Clean Energy Industrial Policy. As we just heard, these three pieces of historic legislation provide really a once-in-a-generation opportunity to create high-quality jobs with strong labor standards in both the new and major sectors of new clean energy technologies. The creation of high-quality jobs will have beneficial ripple effects across the labor market, the economy, and our society more broadly. And in the report, we provide an assessment of these policy developments and their implementation to date. And although good jobs are often a stated commitment of these federally funded programs, our analysis identifies additional untapped legal authority that can be exercised during future rulemakings, guidance, and cycles of funding to support the creation of good jobs. And specifically, we provide 38 recommendations on 7 job quality tools, which I will address and identify shortly, for how the administration can further strengthen job quality and also provide workers with a free and fair chance to join a union. And overall, the purpose of this report, we hope, is to encourage engaged conversation among policymakers, labor leaders, the private sector, and the wider public around how we can create frameworks for strengthening enforceable and contractual job quality, access, and labor standards that are attached to these federal public investments for both construction and ongoing operations and permanent jobs. So in the report, we highlight seven job quality and labor standards that are either statutorily required by the IIJA, IRA, and CHIPS Act, or are otherwise enacted through executive orders, agency rulemaking, or the implementation authority that are under those three laws. And the major challenge to pursuing job quality and union representation is really the structure of American labor law. The federal government is preempted by the National Labor Relations Act, the NLRA, as defined over the decades through successive Supreme Court rulings, from directly mandating unionization, neutrality agreements, or really from any other incursion into the regulatory territory of the NLRA. The construction industry is regulated a bit differently from the broader American workforce, and under these preemption doctrines, what we found is that there really are more constraints in regulating permanent or ongoing manufacturing, service sector, or operations jobs. In other words, what we found is that the federal government really cannot make unionization or any other labor agreement a condition of receiving federal funding. And this is really why we undertook this analysis, to identify the ways in which these major job quality and labor tools listed on the screen could be strengthened through public funding, public investments, and public programs, given the constraints that are imposed by the structure of American labor law. And many of these are time-tested job quality and labor tools that many of you know well, but we posit that their application in these laws is novel, which provides, we think, an opportunity to really shape how the stated workforce goals in the laws and otherwise are really translated into the production of good jobs. And so just to run through these seven very briefly, more in depth in the report, PLAs are pre-hire collective bargaining agreements that establish terms and conditions of employment. Prevailing wage under the Davis-Bacon Act applies to contractors on federally funded public works projects and prevents a race to the bottom on local wages and employment benefits. Local and targeted hire allows states and cities to ensure that jobs are created locally and in the communities through setting aside a certain percentage of jobs created through federal funding. Workforce development and apprenticeship is really a broad category of training, education, registered apprenticeship programs, and others that really focus on skill development and career advancement opportunities. Community benefits plans, David will touch on in greater detail, but they're really an innovative grant management tool that has been developed by the Department of Energy to incentivize and prioritize competitive funding applicants who commit to providing good jobs and strong labor standards in their applications for the federal funding under these laws. I will also touch on labor peace, which most broadly is the promotion of cooperation and gain between workers and unions and employers, but is also a term of art indicating an enforceable promise obtained from a union and management not to engage in strikes and pickets, and often this is bargained for in exchange for other commitments. Lastly, the energy community bonus, which was touched on earlier, is an innovation in the tax code to spur investment in deindustrialized and disinvested regions that are particularly affected by this clean energy transition. And lastly, domestic content provisions are a really crucial tool to promote domestic manufacturing, supply chains, and expand job opportunities domestically. And our 38 recommendations in the report address each of these 7 tools. I'm going to turn it over to David to discuss community benefits plans.
Thank you very much, Hannah. As our report notes, the community benefits plan requirement for many grant applications is the most innovative of the job quality initiatives encouraged by the 3 pieces of legislation that we analyzed. As Hannah mentioned, the National Labor Relations Act preempts federal government agencies from requiring that private sector workplaces have union representation. This means that agencies can only encourage grant recipients to ensure that employees have a free and fair choice to join a union and provide those high-quality jobs. In awarding grants, the evaluation of a grantee's community benefit plan will now provide 20% of the total award score and will need to address the 4 areas that are listed on this slide: investing in America's workforce, engaging communities and labor, advancing diversity, and implementing the Justice 40 initiative. In our paper, we make several recommendations on how agencies could strengthen the impact of CBPs. Among our key recommendations are the following. First, since this kind of scoring to give the awards is new, it's very important to have highly skilled and uniformly trained evaluators who understand both the purpose, complexity, and the strategic benefit of labor relations. Otherwise, there will not be a clear, uniform way of grading the value of the community benefits plan. Another recommendation is the importance of encouraging these plans to actually move to the next step and become agreements that are binding between grant recipients and both their union and community group partners. These binding agreements also need private, independent enforcement mechanisms, such as arbitration. A third, there needs to be more public transparency about these CBPs as on agency websites, so best practices that are achieved by successful CBPs become popularized. Currently, many of these are treated as confidential business information and are kept private. Another recommendation is to use labor risk assessment standards in evaluating both grant applicants and their CBPs. Labor risk should be based on past employment records, using things like wage and hour violations, OSHA fines, EEOC violations, and so forth. Additionally, agencies such as the Department of Labor should provide additional guidance similar to its good jobs principles on how to implement a free and fair choice to join a union. One example might be creating a set of public neutrality principles similar to its job quality checklist and provide sample neutrality agreement language that employers or grant applicants could use. These are just a few of our suggestions on how to broaden the effectiveness of this important job quality initiative. And now I'll turn it back to you, Hannah, to talk for a moment about labor peace agreements.
Thank you very much, David. So in addition to CBPs, the community benefits plans, another approach for permanent and ongoing manufacturing and other jobs that we discuss in the report is really to urge the administration to more strongly consider programs and projects where labor peace requirements may be legally viable. As I noted earlier, and as David just discussed, the NLRA preemption doctrines largely inhibit the federal government from conditioning federal funding on entry into any of these labor agreements. But there is a narrow market participant exception to NLRA preemption for when the government acts consistent with its proprietary interest to either protect or foster its own investments rather than acting in a regulatory capacity. And what we posit in the report is that labor peace requirements may be consistent with the federal government's strong proprietary interest in the efficient and cost-effective implementation of this wide panoply of publicly financed clean energy technology and infrastructure programs. And with that, I will turn it back to David to conclude our discussion and introduce the panel.
Thank you very much, Hannah. It's been a pleasure working on this report with you. And now to delve deeper into how clean energy businesses and unions are implementing the projects supported by these important pieces of legislation, I'd like to introduce Samantha Smith, who is the strategic advisor to the president of the AFL-CIO for Clean Energy Jobs. Samantha has had a distinguished career on the international climate policy stage, leading that work for the World Wildlife Fund for many years, and subsequently as the director of the Just Transition Center for the International Trade Union Confederation. Sam, take it away.
Samantha, you're on mute.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, David, and thank you so much for that introduction. I'll add one thing to my resume, which is that I've also worked in the clean energy sector, specifically on offshore wind and carbon capture and storage. So it's with great pleasure that I welcome representatives of two important clean energy employers, EDF Renewables and US Wind Incorporated, and their union partners, the Labor's International Union of North America, LIUNA, and of course, the United Steelworkers. So I'd like to start with you. Adam Sokolsky is the Director of Regulatory and Legislative Affairs at EDF Renewables. And Timothy Mack, Adam, I'd like to start with you as the Director of Regulatory and Legislative Affairs at EDF Renewables. So EDF Renewables is one of the largest wind and solar developers in the United States. Recently, you signed an MOU, a Memorandum of Understanding, that commits you to ensure that your contractors will enter into project labor agreements to develop something like 2,000 megawatts of utility scale solar in Ohio. Can you tell us a little bit about EDF Renewables and why you made this decision to enter into this MOU with LIUNA?
Samantha, thank you. And thank you to EFI for inviting me to this panel. Yeah, you're right, Samantha. EDF did sign a memorandum of understanding that does commit us to using union labor for our projects in Ohio. It was a smart decision on our part. If you look at utility scale solar and the projects we have in Ohio, they're really large projects requiring multiple year builds, either a full construction season or often multiple construction seasons to complete. Those types of projects require hundreds of tradespeople to construct these high quality projects safely, on time, on budget, with the highest construction standards. As everybody knows, Ohio is not unique in this. There's a hot construction labor market out there. One of the best ways that we at EDF felt that we could meet our goals for high quality construction, meet the numbers of people who we need on site, who are well trained, who do the job safely, is to work with the unions on those projects. There are several other reasons embedded there. Things like Ohio's 80% domicile rule, which is a rule that requires when you're using a payment in lieu of taxes agreement, that you have 80% of the workforce, the construction labor workforce, working on that project, quote unquote, domiciled in Ohio. Again, working with union labor is the best way to achieve that goal. Finally, I'll just call out one other really important thing. The three trades we've signed with are the operating engineers, the electricians, and LIUNA, the laborers. They've done great work together in putting together a three-trade agreement, an agreement for solar projects that they've all agreed to that prescribes, in particular, the jurisdictional assignments for different types of work on site. That shows us that the unions are really working constructively together, thinking about how solar projects get built and how to build them with the smartest, most efficient workforce assignments on a project site. Finally, and maybe most importantly, looking long-term on our project pipeline, working with union labor is the best way for EDF in Ohio to achieve compliance with the Inflation Reduction Act, the prevailing wage requirements therein, as well as the apprenticeship requirements there. There's just no, this is the best possible way that we can go ahead and feel like we're going to comply with those requirements without question. So thanks for the question.
You're welcome. Sounds like it was an easy one to answer. But so now I'd like to introduce Kevin Riley. And Kevin, you're the Assistant Director for Policy at LIUNA, Labor's International Union of North America. I remember when this partnership with EDF got started, had some discussions with your French colleagues who were organizing EDF, amongst other things. And it's amazing to hear how far LIUNA has taken this. So what's your perspective on the value of this partnership with EDF Renewables? Any other tips you want to give us about what makes it work and how we're getting a successful implementation of the IRA?
Sure. Yeah, I always assumed that it was our sexy orange LIUNA t-shirts that attracted EDF, but I gather that one of the largest developers in the world is not making these decisions lightly. And so I think Adam really laid out a lot of the value proposition on their side, but I think they saw in us a partner that was really aligned with the goals. We've got this window where we've got an incredible amount, unprecedented investment. They want to build as many projects as possible. We want to train, recruit, and represent as many members on those jobs as possible. And that alignment is key. But they've taken exactly as Adam said, and as Senator Smith articulated, the history of this industry was not one that was going to capture and keep a lot of skilled workers in a career. And now what EDF is sort of approaching this is not trying to squeeze out the cheapest labor for a 6 weeks project, but creating a labor market that is going to give them access to skilled workers for 6 years and build that pipeline out. And that allows us, that commitment allows us to put the resources in, substantial resources into recruiting and training and keeping those members in those areas in those careers. So I think that's been a winner. But I just have to also just add that EDF's been an incredible partner beyond Ohio. And it's not just the business proposition. They put their money where their mouth is. And I'll mention one particular, a new program that we just got set up with EDF, putting a financial partner as well as program a supporter on a pre-apprenticeship operation. We have a training boot camp around renewables in upstate New York right now. They just finished a cohort training and putting people who have never been in the construction sector, many justice involved, youth, other folks with challenges. That has been so successful. Our folks are telling me now that they're getting phone calls regularly from elected officials and parole officers and school teachers and so forth, trying to get folks into that program. And that's something that shows EDF's going above and beyond trying to actually work with labor on a long-term solution here.
Well, let me congratulate both of you on a very successful partnership and all of the hard work that I know has gone into building it, including the pre-apprenticeship part. So switching sectors a little bit. So Timothy Mack, Tim, you're the foundation and localization manager for US Wind. And I understand that you're a steel guy, and you've been a steel guy most of your life, worked in the industry for more than 30 years before you joined US Wind. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your journey from steel mills to offshore wind, and also about the partnership with you at the US United Steelworkers?
Yes, thank you. And it's a pleasure to be here to service in this forum. So I've been involved in the steel industry, basically on the plate side of the business, which basically is the main medium that interacts with energy projects. And I've had a pleasure of being part of the energy transition. To earlier in career, it was mining and offshore oil and gas. And over time, began to be exposed to the emerging offshore wind industry, and then worked for, several pipe mills, both domestically and in foreign mills as well. And recently, as about 3 years ago, was part of an effort to commission the first tubular plant in New Jersey with EEW. And now we're creating the second facility in Maryland that will do offshore foundations and towers as well. And that would complete one of the major strategic, supply chains that is emerged. And, one of the opportunities that has made Maryland, I think, a really interesting case, where we started, let's say, with some existing desires to recapture industry because of the transition. In this case, it was Sparrows Point, largely a home of, I think at the peak, it was 30 to 40,000 workers, and was the pinnacle of American industry. And over time, due to basically not reinvesting in their product and their people, the business faded and was surpassed on that end. And in about 2014, offshore wind starts to, emerge in Maryland. And, one of the partnerships that began to emerge was the United Steelworkers, which, essentially was a displaced tribe due to the steel mill departing. And through, the partnership with the steelworkers and other labor unions, mainly the building trades in Maryland, we began to, affect policy. And what happened was we had a phased approach in Maryland to reestablish the supply chain through steel And now we are really pressing the forefront and being ready to implement the federal policies that I would say has complemented Maryland's early vision. And now we are one of the developers that has both an integrated steel facility that we'll operate, and we are building a wind farm as well. And the steel workers will operate the production facilities that we're going to manage. So this has been a true example of the goals of the policies that are being fomented right now by this administration. And I think it's something that hopefully can be replicated throughout the country on the back of renewable industry.
Oh, that's a really great journey you had, Tim, and also great to hear about what's happening out there at Sparrows Point. So, Jim Strong, you are the international rep of the United Steelworkers in Maryland. And we heard earlier about the importance of community benefits plans as a vehicle that the labor movement, as well as the Biden administration, would like companies to use. We want to be sure that some of the benefits of all of this money, all of these federal investments that are going into clean energy, that's going to lift everybody's boat. That it's also going to mean jobs and other investments for disadvantaged communities. So how is that going to work in your partnership with US Wind?
Well, thank you, Samantha, for the opportunity. Great question. And I want to thank everybody for the opportunity to be part of this panel, very important discussion. Just want to add to Tim's, this has been a fantastic partnership with US Wind. Back in January of 2001, we did enter into a memorandum of understanding, a labor peace agreement, to work together with them on policy issues, legislation, community involvement. And also now we're in a stage where we're looking out to recruit and train people to go through our apprenticeship program. Sparrows Point, built the communities in that area. One of them is Turner Station. It's predominantly an African-American community. We've already had outreach programs with them, getting them involved with the employment opportunities. Probably at one time, everybody in that community worked at the steel mill. And when it closed in 2013, a lot of workers, a lot of those in that community lost their jobs. So they understand the importance of good paying union jobs. And, so we're working with those communities. We're working with Baltimore County. They have a grant money that's been provided to them to establish a separate staff for Maryland for Wind. And their job is to work with the offshore wind developers to help in these important areas of recruitment, training. So that's some of the things that we're doing to help get these jobs started at US Wind and at Sparrows Point Steel Mill.
That is so good to hear, because I know that unemployment was extremely high after the steel mills closed Baltimore, right? So it's great to see industry coming back to Sparrows Point. So maybe we should turn to a couple of the issues that were flagged in the report that came out today. And these are also issues that we're hearing about from our affiliates more or less all the time. So in some states don't require PLAs. Some states are discouraging PLAs. Some states are certainly, the federal requirements for PLAs not covering anybody. So everybody. So how can state and local regulators, legislators encourage the use of PLAs when they're not required by federal or state law or rule, or even sometimes when states are trying to actively discourage employers from entering into PLAs? I don't know who'd like to get started. Kevin, Adam.
You want to take it?
Oh, sure, I'll jump in. It's Adam Sokolsky at EDF. Regardless of if a state has a mandate or not, regulators who are approving projects or considering projects through the regulatory or permitting jurisdictions, regulators should always ask questions of project developers about construction and workforce issues, right? Who's going to be building these projects? Who's contracted to do the work? What is the local, is the local workforce sufficient to construct this project? What are those gaps in terms of skilled labor that is needed to build these projects out? Asking those questions early during the development and permitting and regulatory processes can give local communities a chance to put together local workforce to achieve and to build those projects out, to train people in the skills needed to go ahead and build those projects. Local regulators, state regulators can tie conditions like pilot agreements or tax abatements to use of either locally domiciled workers like we have in Ohio, or like in Illinois through their Clean Energy Jobs Act has required basically PLAs for construction of most, if not all, renewable energy facilities built in that state. So there's a lot of different tools in the toolbox that local and state regulatory officials can use to both build workforce, train people, and eventually perhaps require PLAs within their jurisdictions. They have to ask questions and they have to be engaged in the process.
Yeah, the only thing I would add, I think that Adam hit everything there. A lot of the power acquisition agreement, the RFPs that coming out on the regulated utilities themselves sometimes have gone as far as requiring project labor agreements for those who are going to submit applications. So there is a range from that level, and those have happened in Indiana and Nevada, but down to exactly what Adam says, you can still, even without a hard requirement, require documentation and evidence of the labor standards that you're going to abide by. So I think that is a great pathway.
Okay, thanks for that advice, both. And now to talk a bit more about manufacturing. So, one of the challenges of community benefits plans, I think it's becoming less and less of a challenge, but is how to make sure that they become contractually binding, that they can be enforced. Especially, for example, if you're a recipient of a grant from the Department of Energy, you've agreed to do a community benefits plan. How can we all make sure that those commitments in the plan are enforceable and that they're translating into the creation of good jobs with labor standards? So what, from your perspective, what other steps could agencies take to make sure that the jobs created with federal funding actually are the same, match up to the commitments that the employer has made in the community benefits plan? I don't know which one of you would like to start. Tim, you've got your mic off. Nicole, and you.
Yeah, so I think that there's a lot of aspects, in this, and taking Maryland, for example. So in our power agreement, there was, let's say, local requirements stipulating, the use of organized labor. There was additional requirements for in-state labor, and then even a breakdown of, integrating with MBE, companies into the supply chain. So that was a precondition that was set down in, let's say, the initial bidding process to start the project and win the power contract. So that sets your roadmap, I think, moving forward. And it allows you to build into a program, and whether it's contracting to build things or managing and constructing a factory, you can plan for it. The areas where I think things get in trouble is when you're going down a pathway and then you're moving into an unfamiliar space and new requirements hit, and then all of a sudden you may not have the options to move forward. So I think early engagement and setting those conditions is one of the better ways that you can make sure that developers have the ability to make the appropriate plans at the right times and have a roadmap and time to do it.
That seems like good advice. Jim, what are your thoughts?
Well, I'm going to agree with what Tim said. Maryland passed the Power Act earlier this year, which, as Tim talked about all those issues. Again, I'll just say that part of our relationship with U.S. Wind is the working with the communities, the vocation schools, the various other schools that we're reaching out to provide the workforce. That's what's going to make this program, our efforts at U.S. Wind successful, is because of our relationship with U.S. Wind and the commitment to bring these good paying union jobs at this facility. And again, we are outreaching to the various communities, especially those communities that have been impacted by the loss of those manufacturing jobs. Something I want to add, Sparrows Point, which is now Trade Point Atlantic, is over 3,000 acres. This U.S. wind project will be the largest manufacturing facility at that site. The other facilities there are mainly distribution warehouses. So manufacturing, especially in steel, is returning back to Sparrows Point. This is nothing but good news, and looking forward to again making this project a success and bringing back good paying union jobs to what the steelworkers always viewed as hallowed ground at Sparrows Point, because we had over 30,000 employees there, members there at one time, and we represented the workers for over 70 years. So this is good news, great opportunity, and I can't be more happier than to be part of this project.
That really means a lot. And one other thing about those other facilities at Trade Point, we have our eyes on them, right? Looking forward to an all-union steelworker plant and also all-union jobs at these warehouses and distribution facilities.
Well,
so a last question about apprenticeships and prevailing wage. I think this is really for you, Kevin, and for Adam. The IRA's prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirements, they went into effect at the end of January 2023. So how do you think it's going? Right? I mean, we're hearing a lot, mostly good. We're also hearing some things that are like, that could be improved. So how do you think it's going? And what recommendations do you have to the Department of Treasury and the Internal Revenue Service, who are basically going to be monitoring the performance, like how employers are doing on these provisions when they're claiming their tax credits?
Sure, well, you're totally right. This is a steep learning curve for a lot of people, including some of our folks, certainly for industries that haven't worked in the public workspace before, how to adjust to prevailing wage, how does that work, an apprenticeship. And I think that there is a lot of uncertainty and there's a real clamor for clarity. And I'm sure Adam can speak to that among not just EDF, but a lot of players. But I think what we've really found is that, look, labor management communication is going to be pretty important regardless. There will be areas that figure it out, but because of the difficulty of sort of aligning the existing resources around knowledge of prevailing wage, knowledge of, and the institutions to build the apprenticeship programs are already there, but not necessarily familiar to many of the actors in this space. And so that is a key piece. I think one recommendation that we are very clearly giving to Treasury is that the focus on outcomes, focus on the making sure that there is compliance among the partners as much as possible, because you don't want IRS officials running around the country trying to figure out who got paid the right wage. So we'd ask that project labor agreements, collective bargaining agreements for construction should represent compliance, right? Because that is your gold standard for compliance on these programs, aligned with the Act. The wages will have to comply appropriately with the Act, but that is a very good example of how it can be streamlined for everybody in that sector of the industry to reduce the burdens of paperwork reporting and the risk of back wage claims or other IRS activities. So I think that hopefully we will get some kind of clarification soon in the rulemaking.
Yeah, we certainly heard President Booker on that one. So Adam, you get the last word. We're going to have to turn to a Q&A session in a second. Is there anything you'd like to add to what Kevin had to say?
I think Kevin said it really well. I think for prevailing wage and apprenticeships, as well as domestic content under the IRA, the details really matter. That industry is forming capital, investing billions of dollars. And we want to make sure that we're complying with the statute and the rules. And so clear guidance, guidance that aligns with how industry works is really, really important. The conversations among Treasury and labor and commerce officials are really, really important to ensure that that the guidance and the documents and the rules can understand and align with how the clean energy industry works, and provide us with the goalposts so we understand how we're going to be measured. As Kevin said, not all of us have been working in the public works space and the public procurement space, and so Davis-Bacon is a little new to a lot of this industry, so there's gonna be a learning curve. But having mechanisms to show good faith compliance and a good faith effort are important. And clearly, if companies are coming in and doing project labor agreements and bringing in apprentices from unions, that should be the gold standard. That should be the easiest one, the easiest cases to say, yes, that's clear compliance. There may be other gray areas, but the details really matter.
Yeah, no, thanks a lot, brothers, gentlemen, for all the contributions. We're going to take some questions now from the audience, and I want to go to the first question, which I think maybe David, you're the best one to answer this. Maybe other panelists would also like to speak to this. But the question is, as both the public and the private sector outsource or contract out more and more jobs and services, how does this practice help or harm the labor community benefits and also the labor unions' viability and effectiveness?
Well, it's a great question, and is something that has been growing in the American workplace for decades, really. On the positive side, this is something that unions can do something about, because contracting out work is a mandatory subject of bargaining. And so if you're working in a factory somewhere or some other stationary workforce, and issues arise about work that is covered by the collective bargaining agreement, that's something that you have to come to an agreement about before something is done. But what I find the most intriguing about the community benefits plan as an approach to dealing with this issue before you may have a union is that the community benefits plan development requires the applicant for a grant to address the issue of workforce development. So they have to speak to where their employees are going to come from, how the work is going to get done, and that would include disclosing whether or not they were going to do it with direct employees or do it through the use of a subcontractor. And in so doing that, then the issues of what the pay is going to be, what job quality is going to be, what the employer's attitude is going to be toward the free and fair choice to join a union, all of those issues will come up and require being discussed. And that is why we made one of our recommendations of high importance was to have very high quality trained evaluators of these community benefit plans, so that it was very clear that the people who were doing the scoring understood the fragility of what happens when you start loading up a workplace with a lot of contract employees. The control over actual conditions of work, everything from safety and health to pay to benefits, deteriorates markedly. And there's ample evidence to point that out. But I'm sure some of the other panelists have views on that, but I am encouraged that the structure of community benefit plans gives the government a role in deciding when, where, and how, and under what conditions contract employees should be used.
If I may jump in.
Yes, please jump in, Hannah.
Thank you, Samantha. One, just following up on David's note, one interesting model that we looked at during the writing of this report is the Department of Commerce's broadband formula grant, which provides an interesting model in that it requires the applicants, which are states and territories, to actually detail how they will encourage or even require prospective either sub-grantees or subcontractors to themselves enter into enforceable labor agreements and comply with the standards that are being stated in those applications to the Department of Commerce. So that's just one example of a model that we encourage and urge should be expanded to other programs as applicable, as a way to ensure that the jobs that are created, not just at the first level of the company, the state that is the applicant for the federal funding, but that are going to be further created through sub-grantees and subcontractors, are also adhering to those requirements.
Yeah, well, we know that with a lot of companies, most of the jobs are in the supply chain, right? That's sort of a hidden workforce in the supply chain. So panelists, I don't know, Adam, Jen, Kevin, Tim, anything you'd like to add to those responses? Okay, I don't think anybody's feeling called. So got another question. This can be for you, Kevin and Adam, and it's about the number of women who are working in construction and operations jobs. So right now, we definitely could have more women trade sisters in construction and operations. What kinds of things are, for example, laborers doing, or NAB2 or EDF as an employer to help ensure that more women are in these high quality skilled jobs?
Yeah, so this is a real challenge, and it's one we've faced for a long time. I think the estimates of our membership, we're very proud of that. We have far, far above the industry average in our membership of women. That doesn't mean there's not a long way to go, but we've got the programs everywhere that dedicate and are thoughtful about this. One of our longest running successful programs of women in the trades is in West Virginia. So it's nationwide. Many apprenticeship programs are dedicated to that. But that said, we have a couple of challenges that always face us, which is the very expensive issue of childcare. That's out there, and that is not something a cost burden that our programs can take on. And so it really is a matter of working a lot with in collaboration with local stakeholders to make sure that there's some way to put those support services together. But from a policy perspective, I would say look at what, I know we're taking it off the energy sector, but if you look at what Secretary Raimondo has sort of pushed in the CHIPS funding, there is a very clear signal to those folks, those semiconductor manufacturers who are going to be building projects with federal money, that they need to invest in precisely those kind of programs to allow for that hurdle, to allow for more women to get on the construction site, whatever that takes. If that means they have to build a child care facility or invest in one, so be it. And I think that's a really good start, an aggressive start. And I think it could be done in other sectors.
100%. As a working mom, I can just say childcare is everything. So, Adam, anything you'd like to add to that? Anything that EDF is doing on this front?
Specifically not, we're interested in ensuring that we have, women represented, folks from diverse and minority populations represented. We were really big on veteran recruitment and ensuring that we have veterans well represented in our workforce. I don't know our metrics offhand on female technicians in the wind and solar industry, so I'm a little bit at a loss, and I'm not going to try to make that up. But the example that Kevin used of our partnership up in New York on trying to reach out to other populations who may be underserved, when we look as a company, and as we look at just as human beings, as in the construction workforce and the skilled trades, we're going to need everyone, and we're going to need a lot more people to build out clean energy over the next 25 or 30 years. We know that the trades are short at times, and ever try to find a plumber or an electrician to do a project at your house, maybe a smaller project that's not a huge project, it can be a real challenge. So we're faced with trying to raise up the conversation about good jobs and training. That includes wind and solar technicians too. So we need people to work on our projects, and we're super well aware of that. I just don't know off the top of my head our metrics on female recruitment and retention and overall numbers.
Well, as President Schuler likes to say, it's about bringing people off the sidelines and into these good paying jobs in the trades. And to do that, it's all about the wraparound services, including and especially childcare. David, looked like you were about to say something.
Yeah, let me jump in or chime in on the role that community benefits plans can play on this issue as well. So, we highlighted that there are 4 pillars to the design of any community benefits plan, and diversity is one of those 4 pillars. And so when a grantee is applying to the Department of Energy or to one of the other agencies that is using a CBP as part of the scoring for whether or not that grant is awarded, really addressing this issue of lack of diversity in workforce is one of the ways that a grantee can move forward. So having a very specific plan on how you're going to do recruitment and training is always at the heart of doing that. And that is how you're going to get a higher score in these grants. And so we push very hard to have these kinds of CBPs publicized so that there is a wider sharing of how you go about drawing people into workforces that traditionally have not been terribly diverse in one way or another. I would cite that there actually is a fair amount of experience as well in certain parts of the energy sector. I would cite both utilities and a few other sectors where they've done a great deal of work at trying to diversify their workforce, and they have, extensive networks. When I left DOE, they were in the process of setting up Women in Energy, which was modeled on the Blacks in Energy association that was increasing diversity among African Americans in the energy sector workforce. And both of those organizations, I think, are real assets that can be used as we start thinking about how we diversify the clean energy transition. And then finally, I would just mention that local hire agreements are likewise a tool that where you have consortiums of groups that are planning or developing projects, they can serve as a tool for interacting with communities and making sure that they become forums through which diversity is built.
Thanks. And Hannah, anything you'd like to chime in as a sister?
No, I think David said it well. Thank you.
Well, this takes us to what might be our final question for the Q&A session, and that's about what happens if a community benefits plan isn't being followed. Like, how do you enforce it? What are the steps? And maybe Jim, I want to direct this a little bit to you. So you're in partnership with US Wind. There's a community benefits plan. Adjacent to that, you have a labor peace agreement. So what do you see as the steps if a community benefits plan is in place, but you see that the employer is not following it?
I'm going to give Tim Mack a lot of hell. Well, look, at this point with US Wind, our relationship has really been fantastic. We've worked well together on the issues that we've been faced with. And I don't believe we're going to have a problem, but if we do, then we'll take the necessary steps through the collective bargaining agreement, work with the Baltimore counties, Maryland for wind, to see what can be done to make sure that the parties are agreeing to what we're supposed to do. But again, to this point, it's US Wind has been very good to work with. We have a solid MOU where there's labor peace. We have in that agreement the parties' agreement to negotiate a contract within a prescribed time. So I just don't foresee us, anything can happen. Of course, new people might come in and might change things, but right now, I don't see us having that problem with US Wind. It's been a very good relationship. We've worked well together on issues.
Yeah. I think to kind of fill in a little bit of that. So at the state level, we have local content commitments that are directly linked to our power price. So there is a amount of hours and we will meet those hours. And it has incentivized us to utilize both Maryland and labor, but I think also components of the IRA and the domestic content, components to establish the supply chain, that's an incentive. So, I mean, I think that there's, let me say soft carrots and sticks, but, ultimately there's a pathway that we've embarked on as in our project that is having both, and we're taking the steps now to accommodate them. So I think it's back to it's embedded into our power agreement and into our incentives with the federal government. So I think that those are the main areas where you have to tie things to business, and you can't have one aspect of the business calculation to be out of line to let's say actual conditions in the marketplace.
Okay, well, so thanks for that. I think that's going to be not quite the last word, because I think we're going to have some closing remarks from Secretary Moniz. But thank you very much for a great panel discussion and a really good webinar. Let's turn it over to you, Secretary Moniz.
Well, thank you, Samantha, and thanks to all the panelists for a very interesting discussion. I think that the panel has demonstrated the enormous value that comes from having business and labor aligned in terms of moving for a word that we probably haven't used enough today, and that is that certainly from the clean energy transition point of view, speed and scale really matter. And what we've heard is this is one way to get speed and scale moving together. So we also heard that that details matter. And with that, I would again go back and recommend our report that Hannah and David have put together, which really drives into tremendous detail. It provides enormous information and recommendations, again, how to have the details addressed in a positive way, and to have the outcomes that the panel has exemplified. Samantha, thank you again for leading that discussion, which again I thought was extremely informative. I think we could have gone on, but we are slightly beyond our appointed time. So with that, I'm going to call the session to a close and just encourage everyone to keep the conversation going. And I am going to invite anyone who has questions on the report to contact David and Samantha directly for clarification. We still have, of course, lots to learn here, and the task at hand is really important. So thank you all. Good day, and I hope the conversation will continue.